The blood dripped onto the dusty floorboards, each crimson drop a testament to Flora Rose's misery, as she huddled in the corner of the dilapidated cabin she'd called home for 3 miserable years. Her trembling fingers pressed a tattered cloth against her split lip, but nothing could stem the tide of despair flooding her heart. El Dorado, Kansas, 1878. The late afternoon sun slanted through the cabin's single window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the fresh bruises blooming on Flora's pale skin. At 22, she'd already lived a lifetime of suffering under the cruel hand of Vernon Rose, the man who had promised to love and protect her when they'd exchanged vows in the small church on the outskirts of town. "You'll be here when I get back," Vernon had growled before slamming the door behind him, the command hanging in the air like a death sentence. He wasn't asking, he never did. Flora winced as she touched the tender spot beneath her eye, already swelling shut. This beating had been worse than usual. Vernon had lost heavily at cards the night before, and as always, she had paid the price for his misfortune. The whiskey on his breath had been strong, his fists stronger. She pulled herself to her feet, legs shaking beneath her faded calico dress. The mirror above the wash basin revealed what she already knew. Her once pretty face was now a canvas of purple and blue, her light brown hair matted with blood from where he'd grabbed it to throw her against the wall. "No more," she whispered, her voice cracking in the empty room. "Please, Lord, no more." Flora knew she had perhaps 2 hours before Vernon returned from the saloon. 2 hours to decide if today would be the day she finally found the courage to run. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. Her parents had died of fever when she was 17, leaving her alone in the world, vulnerable to Vernon's false promises and charming smile. How quickly that smile had vanished after the wedding. With trembling hands, she began to gather what few possessions were truly hers: a locket containing a snippet of her mother's hair, a small pouch with the $3.27 she'd managed to hide away over months, and a shawl her grandmother had knitted. It wasn't much to show for 22 years of life, but it was all she had. A sudden pounding at the door froze her in place, her heart leaping into her throat. Vernon couldn't be back already. She hastily shoved her meager belongings into her pocket and looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. "Mrs. Rose, are you in there?" The voice was deep but unfamiliar, not Vernon's slurred growl. Flora remained silent, pressing herself against the wall beside the door. "Mrs. Rose, I've got your order from Mr. Peterson's store. He asked me to deliver it since I was heading this way." Peterson's store, she'd forgotten. Earlier that week, before Vernon's latest explosion of rage, she'd ordered flour and coffee. With cautious movements, she approached the door, keeping the cloth pressed to her bleeding lip. "Just a moment," she called softly, trying to smooth her hair and wipe the blood from her face. Taking a deep breath, she cracked open the door, keeping half her face hidden behind it. The man on the porch stood tall, his broad shoulders blocking the afternoon sun. The shadow of his hat brim obscured his features, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, dusted with a day's worth of stubble. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, dusty denims, a faded blue shirt, and well-worn boots. Not one of Vernon's drinking companions, at least. "I've got your—" The man stopped mid-sentence as the door opened wider, revealing Flora's battered face. His expression hardened instantly, his blue eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "Madam, you're hurt." "It's nothing," Flora said reflexively, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just had a fall. How much do I owe you for the delivery?" The stranger ignored her question, gently pushing the door open further. "That's no fall, madam. Someone did that to you." Flora dropped her gaze, shame burning in her cheeks despite it being none of her doing. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of a meadowlark. "It's not safe for me to talk," she finally whispered. "Please, just leave the goods and go." "Nathan Calloway," he said instead, setting down the packages and removing his hat in a gesture of respect that nearly broke her. It had been so long since a man had shown her simple courtesy. "I work at the Miller Ranch outside town, and I reckon that's your husband's handiwork." Flora's silence was all the confirmation he needed. "When will he be back?" Nathan asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Soon. Please, you should go." Flora glanced nervously down the dirt path that led from their isolated cabin to town. He doesn't like visitors. I imagine he doesn't. Nathan's jaw tightened, the muscle along it jumping. Mrs. Rose? Flora, she corrected automatically. Being called by her married name only reminded her of the prison she'd found herself in. Flora, he repeated, his voice softening. Pack your things. I'm taking you out of here. The unexpectedness of his offer rendered her momentarily speechless. You don't understand. He'll find me. He always says he will. Not this time, Nathan said, with a certainty that made her want to believe him. I know a place, a ranch about 20 miles south, where a widow named Martha Sullivan takes in women who need somewhere safe. Vernon Rose won't find you there. Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered to life in Flora's chest. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Nathan's eyes, a clear blue that reminded her of summer skies, held her gaze. My sister was married to a man like your husband. By the time someone stepped in to help her, it was too late. His voice caught slightly. I promised myself I'd never stand by again if I saw someone suffering the same fate. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made Flora's decision for her. He's coming back early, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. You have to go. Nathan glanced toward the sound, then back at Flora. Come with me, now. I can't. You can, he insisted, already gathering the few items she'd pulled together. Is there anything else you need? Flora hesitated only a moment longer before grabbing her mother's worn Bible from beside the bed. Just this. Nathan nodded, taking her elbow gently to guide her out the door and around to the back of the cabin where his horse waited. A sturdy buckskin gelding that snorted softly as they approached. We'll have to ride double, Nathan said, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. Hold tight to the saddle horn. The hoofbeats were growing louder. Flora's heart hammered in her chest as Nathan urged the horse into the cover of trees behind the cabin, taking a game trail that would keep them hidden from the main road. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. It had been so long since a man's touch had meant safety rather than pain. They rode in silence for nearly half an hour, putting distance between themselves and the cabin before Nathan finally spoke. Are you all right, Flora? We can rest if you need to. I'm fine, she said automatically, then caught herself. Actually, I'm not. But I will be. Please, let's keep going. Nathan's arms tightened briefly around her in a gesture of reassurance. We'll be at Martha's by nightfall. You're safe now. Flora wanted desperately to believe him, but fear had been her constant companion for too long. Vernon has friends in town. When he finds I'm gone, they'll help him look for me. Let them look, Nathan said grimly. Martha's place isn't on any map, and the few who know of it would die before betraying its location. Her husband was the sheriff before he passed, and she still has plenty of friends who respect the work she does. As they rode, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie. Flora's body ached from the beating, and now from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. Every hoofbeat took her further from Vernon, and that was worth any discomfort. May I ask how long? Nathan's question was gentle but direct. How long what? How long has he been hurting you? Flora sighed, watching a hawk circle overhead in the fading light. It started about a month after we married. A slap at first, then apologies and tears. I believed him when he said it would never happen again. She gave a bitter laugh. It only got worse. 3 years now. Nathan was quiet for a moment. My sister Emily was married 4 years before her husband killed her. 4 years of hell that none of us knew about because she hid it so well. Found out later that half the town suspected, but nobody did a damn thing. He paused. Pardon my language. There's nothing to pardon, Flora said softly. I'm sorry about your sister. That's why I noticed your bruises right away. I've learned to look for the signs. His voice took on a harder edge. And I meant what I said. That's the last time ever he'll lay hands on you. I promise you that, Flora. As dusk settled over the prairie, they crested a small rise, and Nathan pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley below. A main house, a barn, and several smaller cabins were arranged in a rough circle, with corrals and garden plots visible in the fading light. That's Martha's place, he told her. Sullivan Ranch officially, but to women like you, it's sanctuary. Flora felt tears prick her eyes as they approached. Lights glowed warm in the windows of the main house, and as they drew closer, she could make out the figure of a woman standing on the porch. As if she'd been expecting them, Martha Sullivan was a formidable presence despite her small stature. Gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and keen eyes assessed Flora as Nathan helped her down from the horse. "This is Flora Rose," Nathan explained. "She needs a place, Martha." The older woman's expression softened as she took in Flora's battered face. "You've come to the right place, child. Let's get you inside and tended to." Flora turned to Nathan, suddenly afraid. "Will you stay? Just for a little while?" Something flickered in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or something deeper. "I'll stay as long as you need me to, Flora. I promise." Martha led them inside to a warm kitchen, where two other women were preparing the evening meal. They looked up as Flora entered, and though their eyes widened at her injuries, neither showed shock or pity, only understanding. These were women who had walked the same path. "This is Emma and Josephine," Martha introduced them. "Ladies, this is Flora." Nathan brought her in. The women nodded in greeting, and Josephine, a slender woman with dark hair streaked prematurely with gray, pulled out a chair. "Sit, please. You look about ready to collapse." Flora sank gratefully into the offered seat, the events of the day catching up with her all at once. Nathan remained standing, hat in hand, as Martha fetched a basin of water and clean cloths. "You're bleeding," Martha said, gently tilting Flora's face toward the lamplight. "Let me clean these cuts." As Martha tended to her wounds with practiced hands, Flora found herself watching Nathan. He stood by the door, speaking in low tones with a tall man who had entered from another room, Martha's ranch foreman, she guessed. Nathan's face was grim as he explained the situation, and Flora could see the barely contained anger in the set of his shoulders. "Your husband did this?" Martha asked quietly, drawing Flora's attention back. "Yes," Flora admitted, no longer seeing the point in hiding the truth. "Well, he won't find you here," the older woman assured her. "We've had men try before. They don't get past our gate." Flora glanced around the kitchen, taking in the simple but comfortable surroundings. "How many women stay here?" "Right now, 7 including you," Martha replied. "Some stay a few weeks, some longer. We have a school teacher in town who was widowed last year. She comes out twice a week to teach reading and figures to those who want to learn. The ranch is working land. We raise cattle and horses, grow our own food. Everyone contributes what they can. I can cook," Flora offered. "And sew. I'm a fair hand with a needle." Martha smiled, the expression warming her weathered face. "That'll be welcome. But for tonight, all you need to do is rest and heal." Nathan approached then, his hat still in his hands. "I've asked Tom to send a man to watch the trail from town, just in case Rose gets any ideas about tracking you here." "Thank you," Flora said, wishing the words could adequately express her gratitude. "I'll be staying in the bunkhouse tonight," he told her. "With your permission, I'd like to check on you tomorrow." The request, so carefully phrased to give her choice in the matter, nearly brought fresh tears to her eyes. When had anyone last cared what she wanted? "I'd like that." After a simple but filling meal, Martha showed Flora to one of the small cabins. "It's not much," the older woman apologized, lighting the lamp beside the narrow bed. "But it's clean, and it's yours for as long as you need it." Flora looked around the small space, a bed with fresh linens, a chest of drawers, a rocking chair by the window, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. It was humble, but it was the first space she could truly call her own in years. "It's perfect," she whispered. Martha squeezed her shoulder. "Get some rest, child. You're safe here." When the door closed behind Martha, Flora sank onto the edge of the bed, her emotions finally breaking free in quiet sobs. Relief, fear, uncertainty, they washed over her in overwhelming waves. But beneath it all was a tiny spark of something she barely recognized: hope. Outside her window, the vast Kansas sky spread out in a canopy of stars, unimaginably distant, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. Somewhere in that same darkness, she knew, Vernon would be in a rage, perhaps already searching for her. But, for the first time in 3 years, she closed her eyes without fear of what the morning would bring. Sleep, when it came, was deep and dreamless. Flora woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin window, and the distant sounds of the ranch coming to life, the lowing of cattle, the nickering of horses, voices calling greetings across the yard. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she tried to reconcile the unfamiliar surroundings with her memories. Then it all came flooding back, the beating, Nathan's arrival, the escape. She rose gingerly, her body stiff and aching from yesterday's ordeal, and made her way to the small mirror hung beside the basin. The face that looked back at her was a battlefield, her left eye nearly swollen shut, her lips split and puffy, a dark bruise marking her cheekbone. Vernon's final parting gifts. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Flora, it's Martha. I've brought you some fresh clothes and breakfast." Flora opened the door to find the older woman holding a tray and a small bundle of clothing. "Good morning," she said, stepping back to allow Martha entry. "How did you sleep?" Martha asked, setting the tray on the small table. "Better than I have in years," Flora admitted, "though everything hurts this morning." Martha nodded in understanding. "I brought some witch hazel for those bruises and a salve for your lip. The clothes should fit well enough. They belong to Anne, who left us last month to start a new life in Colorado." She laid out a simple blue dress, undergarments, and a shawl. "There's hot water for washing up in the kitchen when you're ready." "Thank you," Flora said, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple kindness. "For everything." Martha's eyes softened. "We help each other here, Flora. That's all. Eat your breakfast, then come to the main house when you're ready. No hurry." After Martha left, Flora ate the simple meal of porridge, bread, and strong coffee, savoring each bite in a way she hadn't been able to do in Vernon's presence. He'd always watched her eat, commenting on every mouthful, controlling even this most basic need. Dressed in the borrowed clothes, which fit her slender frame well enough, Flora made her way across the yard to the main house. The Sullivan Ranch was larger than she'd realized in the fading light yesterday, a substantial operation with well-maintained buildings and fertile fields surrounding it. A dozen or so cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and chickens scratched in a fenced yard beside the kitchen garden. In the daylight, she could see that the sanctuary aspect of the ranch was cleverly disguised. To any casual observer, it appeared to be nothing more than a prosperous working ranch. Only someone who knew what to look for would notice that most of the figures working in the garden or hanging laundry were women. As she approached the main house, Flora spotted Nathan emerging from the barn, deep in conversation with the foreman. Her heart gave an unexpected flutter at the sight of him. In the harsh light of day, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes despite the serious set of his mouth. He looked up and saw her, his expression immediately softening. He excused himself from the foreman and walked toward her. "Morning, Flora," he greeted her, stopping a respectful distance away. "How are you feeling today?" "Sore," she admitted, "but better than yesterday." His eyes took in her injuries, which looked even worse in daylight. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "I'm sorry he did that to you." "It wasn't your fault," Flora said quickly. "No, but I'm still sorry it happened." Nathan gestured toward the porch. "Martha tells me you met some of the other women last night." Flora nodded. "Everyone has been kind. They understand what you're going through better than most," he said. "Martha started this place after her husband died. Sheriff Sullivan had always tried to help women in bad situations, and she wanted to continue his work." They walked slowly toward the porch, where rocking chairs offered a view of the ranch yard. Flora sat gratefully, still weary from her ordeal. "I need to ask you something difficult," Nathan said, taking the chair beside her. "Is there any chance Vernon might know to look for you here?" Flora considered the question carefully. "I don't think so. He doesn't know many people outside of town, and he never mentioned the Sullivan Ranch that I recall. Most of his time was spent either working at the lumber mill or drinking at Donovan's saloon." "That's good," Nathan nodded. "Still, we'll need to be cautious for a while. Vernon Rose has a reputation in El Dorado. He's not a man who likes to lose what he considers his property." The blunt assessment stung, but Flora couldn't deny its accuracy. "That's how he saw me, something he owned." Nathan's hands tightened on the arms of the rocking chair. "That's not how a man should treat his wife, or any woman." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the activities of the ranch. A question had been nagging at Flora since the previous day. "Nathan, why did you come to my cabin yourself?" "Mr. Peterson usually sends his son for deliveries." Nathan looked slightly uncomfortable. "I'd seen you in town a few times, always wearing long sleeves even in summer heat, always keeping your head down. It reminded me of Emily. When Peterson mentioned he had a delivery for the Rose cabin, I offered to take it. I wanted to see for myself if my suspicions were right." He sighed heavily. "I wish they hadn't been." "I'm glad you came," Flora said softly. "I was planning to run away yesterday, but I had no idea where to go. Vernon would have found me eventually." "Not anymore," Nathan said with quiet conviction. "You have people who will stand with you now." Martha emerged from the house, interrupting their conversation. "Flora, if you're feeling up to it, Josephine could use some help with the mending. Nothing strenuous, just sitting work." Flora rose immediately. "Of course, I'd be happy to help." Nathan stood as well. "I should get back to the Miller ranch. Mr. Miller's been generous in letting me stay here overnight, but I have duties to attend to." He hesitated. "Would it be all right if I called again tomorrow?" The question warmed something inside Flora that had been cold for too long. "Yes, I'd like that." As Nathan rode away, Martha gave Flora a knowing look. "That's a good man, Nathan Calloway. One of the few who helps us without wanting anything in return." "Because of his sister?" Flora asked. Martha nodded. "Emily's death changed him. He blames himself for not seeing the signs sooner, though God knows it wasn't his fault. He works for the Millers now, but he helps us whenever he can, bringing supplies, helping with repairs, keeping an ear out for women who might need our help." Flora watched his retreating figure until he disappeared from view. "I owe him my life." "Then that's a good beginning," Martha said cryptically before leading Flora inside to where Josephine sat surrounded by mending. The next days fell into a pattern that brought Flora an unfamiliar sense of peace. She rose with the sun, took her meals with the other women, and contributed to the running of the ranch in whatever ways her healing body allowed. The work was therapeutic, giving structure to days that had previously been shaped by fear and anticipation of Vernon's moods. Each of the women at Sullivan Ranch had her own story, her own scars, some visible, others hidden beneath carefully constructed composure. Emma had fled a husband who had broken her arm when she lost their second child in childbirth. Josephine had escaped with her 2 children from a man who had threatened to sell their daughter to pay gambling debts. Louise, Sarah, and Rebecca had similar tales of cruelty and narrow escapes. They accepted Flora without question, incorporating her into their makeshift family with a compassion born of shared experience. For the first time in years, Flora found herself laughing, sharing confidences, making plans that extended beyond mere survival. And then there was Nathan. True to his word, he returned the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes he brought supplies from town, coffee, sugar, fabric for dresses, a newspaper. Other times he came with nothing but his presence, helping with repairs around the ranch, or simply sitting with Flora on the porch as evening fell. They talked of everything and nothing, his childhood in Missouri. Her dreams of becoming a teacher before her parents' death had left her destitute and vulnerable to Vernon's courtship. He told her about his work at the Miller Ranch, breeding and training horses, and she shared the few happy memories of her life before Vernon. What began as gratitude on her part slowly transformed into something deeper. Nathan never pressed, never rushed, never assumed. He simply offered his friendship, his respect, his time, gifts more precious to Flora than any material possession could have been. 2 weeks after her arrival at the sanctuary, Martha handed Flora a sealed envelope. "This came for you today." Nathan brought it from town. Flora's hand trembled as she took the letter. "Is it from Vernon?" "No, child. It's from Judge Monroe in El Dorado. Nathan spoke to him about your situation." Flora opened the letter with shaking fingers, scanning the formal language until she found the essential message. Judge Monroe was willing to grant her a divorce from Vernon Rose on grounds of cruelty, provided she could appear before him to testify. The letter concluded with an assurance that the sheriff would ensure her safety during the proceedings. "A divorce," she whispered, the word both terrifying and liberating. Women who divorced were often ostracized, their reputations permanently stained. Yet the alternative, returning to Vernon or living forever in hiding, was unthinkable. "It's your choice, Flora," Martha said gently. No one will force you either way. That evening, when Nathan arrived, Flora showed him the letter. They sat side by side on a fallen log near the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the ranch property, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Judge Monroe is a fair man, Nathan told her. He's seen enough of Vernon's behavior in town to believe your account without question. And Sheriff Burke has wanted to lock Vernon up for years. He just never had a witness willing to testify. I'm afraid, Flora admitted, watching the water ripple over stones in the creek bed. Not just of seeing Vernon again, but of what comes after. A divorced woman has few prospects, especially one with no family or means of support. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. You could stay here as long as you need to. Martha has said as much. And then what? Hide away forever? Flora shook her head. I need to face him, to end this properly. I just don't know if I have the courage. You're one of the bravest people I've ever known, Flora Rose. Nathan's voice was low but firm. You survived 3 years with a monster. You found the strength to leave when the opportunity came. There's nothing you can't face now. His faith in her brought tears to her eyes. Will you come with me to El Dorado for the hearing? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he promised. We'll face this together. 3 days later, Flora found herself sitting in Judge Monroe's chambers in El Dorado, Nathan and Sheriff Burke flanking her like protective sentinels. The judge, a stern-faced man with kind eyes, listened patiently as she recounted the years of abuse, her voice growing stronger with each painful revelation. Vernon had been arrested the previous night for drunken brawling, a deliberate plan orchestrated by the sheriff to keep him locked up until after the hearing. He would not know of the divorce until it was already granted. Mrs. Rose, Judge Monroe said when she had finished her testimony, the law of Kansas allows me to grant this divorce on the grounds you have presented. Your husband's treatment of you violates both legal and moral codes. He signed the document before him with a flourish. You are hereby legally separated from Vernon Rose, with all the freedoms and protections that entails. Flora felt lightheaded with relief. Barely registering the judge's additional comments about property rights, she wanted nothing from Vernon, and her restored maiden name, Flora Reynolds, once more. As they left the courthouse, Sheriff Burke touched the brim of his hat. I'll make sure Rose knows to stay clear of you, Miss Reynolds, and if you ever need anything in town, my office is always open. Thank you, Sheriff, Flora said sincerely. When they were alone, Nathan turned to her. How does it feel to be Flora Reynolds again? Strange, she admitted, but good, like I've been given a second chance at life. She looked up at the familiar buildings of El Dorado, the general store where she'd once worked before her marriage, the milliner's shop where Vernon had forbidden her to go, the church where false vows had been exchanged. I never thought I'd walk these streets as a free woman again. Nathan offered his arm, which she took gratefully. Where would you like to go now? We should leave town before Vernon is released, but we have time for a short stop if there's somewhere you want to visit. Flora considered for a moment. The cemetery. I'd like to visit my parents' graves before we go. The small graveyard on the outskirts of town was peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. Flora knelt beside the simple markers that bore her parents' names, brushing away leaves and placing the wildflowers she'd gathered along the way. I wish you could have met them, she told Nathan, who stood respectfully a few paces back. They would have liked you. I wish I could have known them too, he replied. They raised a remarkable daughter. As they rode back to Sullivan Ranch, Flora's new status as a divorced woman weighed heavily on her mind. The judge's decree had freed her legally, but the social consequences would follow her wherever she went. In many circles, a divorced woman was considered damaged goods, unfit for respectable company. What are you thinking? Nathan asked, noticing her pensive mood. About the future, she admitted. About what happens next. Whatever you want to happen, he said simply. That's the beauty of freedom, Flora. You get to choose. The truth of his words struck her with unexpected force, choice. After years of having every aspect of her life controlled by Vernon, the concept of choosing her own path was both exhilarating and terrifying. Back at Sullivan Ranch, the news of the divorce was met with celebration. Martha produced a bottle of blackberry cordial she'd been saving for special occasions, and the women toasted Flora's new beginning with genuine joy. To freedom, Emma proposed, raising her small glass. To freedom, the others echoed, and Flora felt the word resonate in her soul. Later that evening, she found herself once again sitting beside the creek with Nathan, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking a comfortable silence. "The Millers are looking for someone to help in the main house. Mrs. Miller isn't well, and the cooking and cleaning is becoming too much for her. It would be a respectable position, with your own room and fair wages." Flora turned to look at him, touched by his concern for her future. "You asked them to hire me?" "I mentioned that I knew someone who might be suitable," he clarified. "They trust my judgment, but it's entirely your decision, Flora. Martha has made it clear you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay." The offer was tempting a chance for independence, for earning her own way in the world again. Yet something in Nathan's careful phrasing gave her pause. "Is that what you want, Nathan? For me to work for the Millers?" He looked down at his hands, unusually hesitant. "What I want," he began, then stopped. "What I want isn't as important as what you need right now." "Tell me anyway," she pressed gently. Nathan met her gaze, the intensity in his blue eyes making her breath catch. "What I want is to keep you safe, to see you smile every day, to help you build a life where no one ever hurts you again." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Flora. More than I should, perhaps, given all you've been through." Flora felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer evening. "I care for you too, Nathan. You've shown me what a good man truly is." "I would never rush you," he said earnestly. "I know you need time to heal, to find yourself again after everything Vernon took from you. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." In that moment, Flora recognized the feeling that had been growing within her over the past weeks, not mere gratitude or friendship, but something deeper and more profound. She had been so focused on escaping the past that she hadn't fully acknowledged what was developing in the present. "I'd like to accept the position with the Millers," she said, "but not because I'm running from anything, because I'm moving towards something." Nathan's smile lit his entire face. "They'll be pleased to hear it." The transition to the Miller Ranch a week later was bittersweet. Flora had grown fond of Martha and the other women at Sullivan Ranch, finding in their company a sisterhood she'd never known. They sent her off with embraces and small gifts, a knitted shawl, a jar of honey, a book of poems. "You'll always have a place here," Martha assured her. "Remember that." The Miller Ranch was larger than Sullivan's, with a sprawling main house that spoke of generations of prosperity. Mrs. Miller, a frail woman with a kind face, welcomed Flora warmly. "Nathan speaks very highly of you," she said, showing Flora to a comfortable room at the back of the house. "And any woman who's survived what you have must have extraordinary strength of character." Flora settled quickly into her new role, finding satisfaction in keeping the house in order and preparing meals for the family and ranch hands. Mr. Miller was a fair employer who treated her with respect, and Mrs. Miller became something of a mentor, teaching Flora the management of a large household. And then there was Nathan, whose cabin stood a short distance from the main house. They saw each other daily, sharing meals with the other ranch hands, passing in the yard, occasionally finding moments alone during the evening hours when the day's work was done. Their relationship developed slowly, built on conversation and shared experiences rather than grand gestures. Nathan taught her to ride properly, laughing with delight at her newfound confidence in the saddle. She mended his shirts and baked his favorite apple pie, small domestic acts that brought her joy rather than the resentment she'd felt performing similar tasks for Vernon. Summer faded into autumn, the prairie grasses turning golden under the October sun. Flora had been at the Miller Ranch for 3 months of healing, of learning to trust again, of rediscovering her own strength. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Nathan invited her to ride with him to a place he wanted to show her. They followed a stream that cut through Miller property until they reached a small valley nestled between gentle hills. A stand of cottonwoods provided shade, and wildflowers still bloomed in protected pockets despite the advancing season. "It's beautiful," Flora said as they dismounted. "How did you find it?" "I came across it last spring when I was looking for strays," Nathan explained, spreading a blanket beneath the largest tree. "I've never brought anyone else here." They shared the simple meal Flora had packed: fried chicken, biscuits, apple cake, and talked of inconsequential things as the afternoon shadows lengthened. There was an expectancy in the air, a sense that something important hovered just beyond the spoken words. Finally, Nathan reached for her hand, his expression serious. "Flora, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes?" "These past months, getting to know you, seeing your courage and kindness, they've been the happiest of my life." He took a deep breath. "I know it might be too soon, and I'll understand if you need more time, but I can't keep my feelings to myself any longer." He met her gaze steadily. "I love you, Flora Reynolds. I think I've loved you since that first day on your porch, when you were hurt and afraid, but still had fire in your eyes." Flora felt tears well up, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Nathan, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know what you've been through, and the last thing I want is to pressure you." "Nathan," she interrupted, squeezing his hand, "I love you too." The simple declaration hung between them, powerful and transformative. Nathan's face lit with such joy that Flora felt her own heart might burst with happiness. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted. "After Vernon, I believed that part of me was dead forever. But you brought it back to life, Nathan. You showed me what real love looks like: patient and kind and respectful." "Flora Reynolds," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The question should have terrified her, the idea of marriage again, of binding herself to a man's protection and authority. But this was Nathan, who had never once made her feel less than his equal, who had respected her boundaries and celebrated her independence. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Nathan Calloway, I will marry you." His kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand, and Flora answered with all the love that had been building in her heart. When they finally drew apart, the setting sun had painted the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. "I have something for you," Nathan said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not fancy, but it belonged to my grandmother." He opened his palm to reveal a simple silver ring set with a small pearl. "If you'd prefer something else—" "It's perfect," Flora interrupted, offering her hand so he could slide the ring onto her finger. The weight of it felt nothing like the heavy gold band Vernon had placed there years ago. This was a promise, not a shackle. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Flora marveled at the turns her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been trapped in a nightmare with no apparent escape. Now she rode beside a man who had shown her what love truly meant, wearing his ring and carrying his promise in her heart. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch, met with wholehearted approval. Mrs. Miller insisted on hosting the wedding at the main house, and Mr. Miller offered Nathan a promotion to head wrangler, a position that came with the use of a small but comfortable house on the ranch property. "It needs some fixing up," Nathan told Flora, as he showed her the whitewashed cottage the following day. "But it could be a good home for us." Flora walked through the simple rooms, imagining curtains at the windows, a garden plot outside, perhaps someday the patter of children's feet on the wooden floors. "It's not the house that makes a home, Nathan. It's the people in it." They decided on a December wedding, enough time to prepare, but not so long that they had to wait through the winter. Flora wrote to Martha, who promised that she, and as many of the Sullivan Ranch women as could be spared, would attend. As the wedding date approached, Flora's happiness was marred by only one shadow: the lingering fear of Vernon Rose. Though he had made no attempt to contact her since the divorce, his presence in El Dorado was a constant reminder of the past she was trying to leave behind. "What if he tries to stop the wedding?" she asked Nathan one evening, as they sat planning their future. "He won't," Nathan assured her. "Sheriff Burke has made it very clear what would happen if Vernon came anywhere near you. Besides," he added with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "he'd have to get past me first." 2 weeks before the wedding, the issue resolved itself in unexpected fashion. Mr. Miller returned from a trip to El Dorado with news that Vernon Rose had left town, reportedly heading for the silver mines in Colorado after losing his job at the lumber mill. The relief Flora felt was profound. "Is it really over?" she asked Nathan that night as they walked beneath a star-filled sky. "It's over," he confirmed. "Vernon Rose no longer has any power over your life, Flora. you're free." On their wedding day, a crisp December morning with frost sparkling on the prairie grass, Flora stood before the mirror in her room at the main house, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The bruises had long since faded, leaving no visible marks on her face. The deeper wounds, the ones that couldn't be seen, were healing too, slowly but surely. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant cream-colored silk that Martha and the women of Sullivan Ranch had helped her sew, adorned with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair, grown long again in the months since she'd left Vernon, was arranged in soft curls beneath a crown of winter berries and evergreen. A knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance. The older woman stopped, her eyes filling with tears as she took in the sight of the bride. "Oh, Flora, you look beautiful." "Thanks to you," Flora said, embracing her friend. "I wouldn't be here without you, Martha, without the sanctuary you provided when I needed it most." "You did the hard part yourself," Martha countered. "You found the courage to leave, to start again." She adjusted a curl at Flora's temple. "Nathan is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Flora said softly. The ceremony in the miller's parlor was small but meaningful. Judge Monroe, who had granted Flora's divorce, now officiated at her marriage. Sheriff Burke stood as Nathan's best man, while Emma from Sullivan Ranch served as Flora's matron of honor. The Miller family, the women from the sanctuary, and several of Nathan's fellow ranch hands formed the small congregation. As Flora walked toward Nathan, who waited for her beside the flower-decked fireplace, she felt none of the apprehension that had marked her first wedding. There was only certainty, joy, and a love so deep it brought tears to her eyes. The vows they exchanged were traditional in form, but revolutionary in meaning for Flora. When she promised to love, honor, and cherish, she did so as a free woman making a choice, not as a desperate girl seeking escape from poverty. When Nathan vowed to protect and respect her, she believed him with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Monroe declared, his stern face softened by a rare smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Calloway." Nathan's kiss was gentle yet passionate, a promise of all the days to come. When they turned to face their friends, Flora saw nothing but joy and approval in the faces surrounding them. The celebration that followed was warm and festive despite the winter chill outside. Mrs. Miller had overseen the preparation of a magnificent feast, and Mr. Miller opened bottles of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. There was music and dancing, laughter, and a few happy tears. As evening approached, Flora and Nathan prepared to depart for their new home, the small cottage that they had spent weeks preparing together. Friends gathered on the porch to wish them well. Showering them with rice and good wishes as they climbed into the wagon Nathan had decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. "Ready, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked as he took up the reins. "More than ready, Mr. Calloway," she replied, the new name feeling right on her tongue. Their cottage welcomed them with glowing windows, Martha and Emma having gone ahead to light the lamps and build up the fire against the December cold. Inside, everything was exactly as they had arranged it. Simple furnishings made comfortable with cushions and quilts, shelves filled with books they both enjoyed, a kitchen stocked with provisions for their first days as husband and wife. "Welcome home, Flora," Nathan said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, Flora marveled at how different this night was from her first wedding night. Where there had been fear, now there was trust. Where there had been pain, now there was tenderness. Where there had been silence and submission, now there was conversation and mutual discovery. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never knew it could be like this," she answered honestly. "That love doesn't have to hurt." He gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I promise you, Flora Calloway, that as long as I live, love will only ever bring you joy." Spring came early to Kansas in 1879, painting the prairie with wildflowers and filling the air with birdsong. Flora stood in the doorway of their cottage, watching Nathan work with a young colt in the nearby corral. 4 months of marriage had only deepened their bond, each day bringing new discoveries and shared joys. The cottage had become a true home under Flora's care. Curtains graced the windows, a vegetable garden flourished beside the back door, and flowers bloomed in beds along the front path. Inside, The rooms were filled with small treasures that reflected their shared life books. A quilt Martha had given them as a wedding present. Sketches Flora had drawn of the ranch and its inhabitants. Nathan looked up, catching sight of her in the doorway. His smile still made her heart skip a beat. He said something to the young ranch hand working alongside him, then vaulted over the corral fence and strode toward her. "You're looking mighty pleased with yourself, Mrs. Calloway," he said, stopping to wash his hands at the pump before approaching her. "Any particular reason?" Flora's hand drifted to her stomach, still flat beneath her apron. "I might have a secret or two, Mr. Calloway." His eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "Flora, are you—" "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I went into town with Mrs. Miller," she said, unable to contain her smile any longer. "We're going to have a baby, Nathan, in late October, he thinks." Nathan let out a whoop of joy that could probably be heard all the way to the main house, then swept her into his arms, mindful as always of his strength. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." As he knelt before her, pressing his ear to her belly as if he might already hear the tiny heartbeat within, Flora ran her fingers through his hair and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for Nathan's appearance on her porch that bloody afternoon, for Martha's sanctuary, for second chances and new beginnings. "That's the last time ever," Nathan had promised on the day they met, as she bled from Vernon's final beating. Looking at him now, his face alight with joy at the prospect of fatherhood, Flora knew with absolute certainty that he had kept that promise and would continue to keep it for all the days of their lives. The sun sank toward the horizon, bathing the prairie in golden light. From the main house came the distant sound of the dinner bell, calling the ranch hands in from the fields. Soon they would walk together to join the others, to share their happy news and receive congratulations. But, for now, they simply stood together in the doorway of the home they had created, husband and wife, soon to be father and mother, their hard-won happiness stretching before them like the endless Kansas sky.